I brushed off my husband's attempts to apologize. Now I can't believe he's leaving me. The first box arrived on a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays were always busy at the office and I'd come home late with my mind still spinning from back-to-back meetings. There it sat, a modest brown package on our kitchen counter with a small card attached. Inside was a simple silver bracelet with a single charm, a tiny olive branch. The note read, "I'm sorry. Can we talk, M?" I slipped the bracelet back into its box and placed it in my desk drawer without trying it on. Then I made myself dinner, ate alone as I had for the past 2 weeks, and went to bed without sending a text. Mark would come home from his business trip in 3 days. We could talk then or not. I wasn't sure I was ready. That had been the beginning of the end, though I was too proud to see it then. Mark and I met in our late 20s, both established in our careers and certain of what we wanted from life. I was an ambitious marketing director at a tech firm. He was an architectural engineer whose work took him across the country for weeks at a time. Our courtship was passionate but practical. We understood each other's drive and independence. When he proposed after 18 months, it felt like a natural progression rather than a fairy tale. "We make sense together," he'd said, not on bended knee, but across a table at our favorite restaurant, his eyes serious and certain. "I've never met anyone who understands me the way you do." I'd felt the same. Mark was the first man who didn't ask me to dim my light. He championed my success as his own, and never seemed threatened when I out-earned him for 2 years straight. We were equals, partners in the truest sense. Our wedding was small and elegant, just like our relationship, no unnecessary frills, just substance and commitment. The first 5 years were everything I'd hoped for in a marriage. We built a sleek modern home in a neighborhood on the rise. We traveled extensively, collected art, and hosted dinner parties that our friends raved about for weeks. We were the couple others looked to as an example of how to balance ambition and partnership. "You two have it all figured out," my sister once said over wine. "Jackson and I are always fighting about who does what around the house, but you and Mark just flow." I'd smiled, pleased with the observation because it was true. Mark and I rarely argued. We approached disagreements like business negotiations calmly, rationally, with clear outcomes. I prided myself on not being that wife, the emotional, demanding one who needed constant reassurance and attention. The trouble started so slowly I barely noticed it at first. Mark's business trips grew longer, more frequent. My own work expanded as I took on larger campaigns and a team of my own. We started communicating more by text than conversation, scheduling our time together like appointments. Sex became less spontaneous, then less frequent, then almost perfunctory when it happened at all. "We're just busy," I told myself. "This is what success looks like." But on our 6th anniversary, when Mark called to say he couldn't make our dinner reservation because a client meeting was running late, something shifted inside me. I sat alone at our favorite restaurant, drinking an expensive bottle of wine by myself while the waiter gave me pitying glances. "It's fine," I texted him. "We'll celebrate another time." His response came hours later. "I'm so sorry, Emma. I'll make it up to you." He tried, I have to give him that. He came home with flowers the next day and suggested a weekend away. But I was cold, distant. I told him I had a deadline and couldn't possibly get away. It was the first time I deliberately punished him, and it felt simultaneously terrible and satisfying. "You don't have to do that," he said quietly. "I know I messed up." "Do what?" I replied, all innocence. "I really do have a deadline." He looked at me for a long moment, something sad passing behind his eyes, then nodded. "Okay, I understand." That became our pattern. Mark would disappoint me in some way, try to make amends, and I would rebuff him with cool indifference. I never raised my voice or cried. I simply withdrew, making myself unavailable emotionally while maintaining the perfect facade of our marriage. Looking back, I can see how each small rejection erected another wall between us, brick by brick, until we could barely see each other anymore. The fight that broke us happened on an ordinary Sunday. Mark had been home for a full weekend, rare enough these days, and I'd been planning to finish a presentation for Monday. We were moving through the house like polite strangers, careful not to disturb each other's orbits. "I was thinking," he said over breakfast, "maybe we could go hiking today? Weather's perfect, and we haven't been to Redwood Trail since last summer. I looked up from my tablet where I'd been answering emails. I can't. This presentation isn't going to finish itself. It's Sunday, Emma. His voice held a note of exasperation. Your team won't even see it until tomorrow afternoon. That's not the point. I like to be prepared. When did you become all work and no play? He pushed his plate away, half his food untouched. We used to have fun together, remember? The accusation stung. That's not fair. We're not in our 20s anymore, Mark. This is what adult life looks like. No, he said, shaking his head. This is what our life has become, but it's not what it has to be. I stood up, gathering my dishes. If you're bored, maybe you should call one of your friends to go hiking. I'm sure Tom would love to join you. I don't want to go with Tom. I want to go with my wife. Well, your wife has work to do. He caught my arm as I turned to leave. Emma, stop, please. Can we just talk about what's happening with us? I pulled away. There's nothing to talk about. I'm busy. You're busy. That's marriage after the honeymoon phase. Is it? His eyes searched mine. Because I look at other couples, hell, even your sister and Jackson, and they still seem to like each other. When was the last time we did anything just because it was fun? Maybe you should have married someone more fun then, I snapped, immediately regretting the words. His face hardened. Maybe I should have. The silence that followed was deafening. We stood frozen, the words hanging between us like poison. Mark, I didn't mean. Yes, you did. He grabbed his keys from the counter. You know what? I think I will go hiking. Alone. The door closed behind him with a decisive click, not a slam. Mark never slammed doors. It was too undignified, too emotional. Just like raising your voice or crying in an argument was too emotional for me. I returned to my work, telling myself he was overreacting. By evening, he'd be back, and we'd move past this like we always did with civil detachment, and the mutual agreement not to probe too deeply into our wounds. But Mark didn't come home that night. Or the next. He texted only to say he was staying with a friend and needed some time to think. I responded with a curt, fine, though my stomach was in knots. This wasn't our pattern. Mark always came back, always tried to make peace. On the third day, he returned to pack a suitcase. I watched from the doorway of our bedroom, arms crossed. So you're leaving? It wasn't a question. I have that conference in Chicago, he said, not meeting my eyes. I'll be gone 2 weeks. And after that, he stopped folding his shirt, his hands stilling on the fabric. I don't know, Emma. I honestly don't know if I can keep doing this. Doing what, exactly? My voice was sharp, defensive. Living like roommates instead of husband and wife, tiptoeing around each other, never really talking. He finally looked at me. When did we stop being a team? I wanted to argue, to tell him he was being dramatic, but the truth of his words hit too close to home. We're just going through a rough patch. All couples do. A rough patch is a few tough weeks, maybe a month. We've been living like this for over a year. He zipped his suitcase with finality. I've tried, Emma. I've tried to talk to you, to reconnect, but you're always too busy or too tired or just not interested. That's not true, I protested, but even to my own ears, it sounded hollow. Isn't it? He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. That when was the last time you asked about my day, or told me about yours, not the facts, but how you felt about it? When was the last time we had sex that didn't feel like checking a box on a to-do list? My cheeks burned with humiliation and anger. So this is about sex? No. He almost shouted it, then took a deep breath. No, it's about intimacy. All kinds of intimacy. We used to tell each other everything. Now I feel like I'm living with a polite stranger who occasionally shares my bed. I turned away, unable to bear the raw pain in his eyes. You're exaggerating. Am I? He picked up his suitcase. I'll call you when I get to Chicago. And then he was gone again, leaving me in a house that suddenly felt too big and too quiet. The next day, the first package arrived, the silver bracelet with the olive branch charm. I put it away and tried to convince myself that Mark was just having a midlife crisis. He'd come back. He always came back. The second gift arrived 3 days later, a small potted plant with heart-shaped leaves and another note. This is a peace lily. It can thrive even when neglected, but it blooms most beautifully when cared for, like marriages. Can we please talk? M. I watered the plant but didn't call. On the 7th day of his trip, A book arrived, a collection of love letters between a famous historian and his wife, spanning 50 years of marriage. Mark's note read, "They went through wars, distance, tragedy, and triumph, but they never stopped communicating. I miss talking to you, Emma. Really talking, Em." I flipped through the pages, reading passages about longing and forgiveness, about the hard work of loving someone through change and challenge. For the first time, I felt a crack in my armor, a whisper of doubt about my own role in our estrangement. That night, I called him. He answered on the first ring, "Emma." My name in his voice was both a question and a sigh of relief. "I got your gifts," I said, suddenly unsure what to say next. And, I don't know. I think we should talk when you get back." "I'd like that." He paused. "I've been doing a lot of thinking, Emma. About us, about what went wrong." Something in his tone made me uneasy. "Nothing's wrong that can't be fixed." "Maybe." Another pause. "But both people have to want to fix it." "I do," I said quickly, too quickly. "Do you?" His voice was gentle but probing. "Because sometimes I think you're happier with your independence than with our partnership." The accusation stung because there was truth in it. I had been treating our marriage like an occasional inconvenience, something to fit around my career and personal goals, rather than a living, breathing relationship that needed constant tending. "That's not fair," I said, default defensiveness rising. "Just because I have a demanding career. This isn't about your career, Emma. It's about your heart. Where is it? Because for the past year it hasn't been with me." I didn't have an answer that wasn't a lie. "I have to go," he said after my prolonged silence. "Early meeting tomorrow." "But Emma, think about what you really want, not what you think you should want or what looks good on paper. What would make you happy?" The call ended and I sat in our empty living room, surrounded by evidence of our successful life together, the artwork we'd collected, the sleek furniture we'd chosen, the awards and diplomas on the walls. But where were the signs of joy? Where were the inside jokes, the shared dreams, the casual intimacy that should pervade a home? For the first time in years, I let myself cry, not the dignified, controlled tears I might allow at a moving film, but ugly, racking sobs that left me gasping for breath. I cried for what we'd had and lost, for my part in that loss, and for the uncertain future stretching before me. The days before Mark's return passed in a fog of self-reflection and regret. I canceled meetings, something I never did, and spent hours walking through our neighborhood trying to understand how we'd gone so wrong. The truth, when I finally faced it, was painful in its simplicity. I had prioritized being right over being connected. I had chosen pride over vulnerability, independence over interdependence. Somewhere along the way, I decided that needing Mark emotionally, physically, in any way was a weakness I couldn't afford to show. And in protecting myself from the perceived weakness of need, I'd starved our marriage of the very oxygen it required to survive. I made plans for his return, a special dinner, a weekend away, a new start. I practiced what I would say, how I would apologize, how we would rebuild. I watered the peace lily and wore the olive branch bracelet, symbols of my readiness to change. But when Mark finally walked through the door 2 weeks after our fight, one look at his face told me I was too late. "I'm not staying," he said, setting down his suitcase in the foyer rather than carrying it to our bedroom. "I just came to talk." "Mark, please." I reached for him, but he stepped back. "I've been thinking about everything. And you're right. I've been cold and distant, and I'm sorry. We can fix this." He shook his head, his expression a mixture of sadness and resolve. "I've been trying to fix it for over a year, Emma. Every attempt was met with indifference or outright rejection. I know, and that's on me, but I get it now. I do. Please, just give me a chance to show you I can change. That's the thing." He sighed heavily. "I don't think either of us should have to change who we are to make this work. Maybe we've just grown in different directions." "No." Panic rose in my chest. This wasn't how the conversation was supposed to go. "No, that's not true. We're just out of sync. We can get back to where we were." "Where we were?" He looked at me with surprise. "Emma, even at our best, we were always a little too careful with each other. A little too rational. I used to think that was a strength, but now I'm not so sure." "What are you saying?" My voice trembled. "I'm saying I want more." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I'd always found endearing. "I want passion, and messiness and real intimacy. I want someone who isn't afraid to need me, who lets me see them at their most vulnerable. I can be that person, I insisted, tears threatening. Can you? Because in 7 years, I've never once seen you truly lose control, not in anger, not in joy, not in anything. It's like you've built this perfect armor, and no one's allowed inside, not even me. His words cut through me like a blade, exposing truths I'd never acknowledged. Where have you been staying? I asked, suddenly realizing I didn't know. With David. He named a colleague I'd met a few times. He's letting me use his guest room until I figure things out. And what are you figuring out exactly? He met my gaze directly. Whether our marriage can be saved, whether it should be. The finality in his voice broke something in me. For the second time in a week, I began to cry, not the controlled tears I would normally allow myself, but deep, body-shaking sobs that came from a place I'd kept locked away for years. Mark watched, his own eyes glistening, but he didn't reach for me. Once that would have been automatic, to comfort me, to hold me. His restraint spoke volumes. I never meant to hurt you, I managed between sobs. I thought I was being strong. I know. His voice was gentle but firm. But sometimes strength is in letting someone see your weakness. He picked up his suitcase again. I need more time, Emma, and I think you do too. Really think about what you want and what you're willing to give to have it. As he turned to leave, I called after him, desperation making me reckless. I love you. Doesn't that count for anything? He paused at the door, his shoulders slumped. Love is a start, but it's not enough without trust, vulnerability, and real partnership. He looked back at me one last time. And I don't think you trust me with your heart. Not really. The door closed behind him, and I sank to the floor, the full weight of what I stood to lose finally crashing over me. The weeks that followed were the most painful and illuminating of my life. Mark and I communicated mainly by text. Brief exchanges about practical matters, bills, mail, a leaky faucet in the guest bathroom. He came by the house sometimes when he knew I'd be at work, picking up more of his things, leaving the space increasingly empty. I threw myself into understanding what had gone wrong, not just in our marriage but in me. I started seeing a therapist, something I'd always dismissed as unnecessary. Dr. Levine helped me see the patterns I'd been blind to, how my parents' volatile relationship had taught me that emotions were dangerous, how my early career struggles in a male-dominated industry had convinced me that vulnerability was weakness, how I'd confused independence with isolation. Being strong doesn't mean being alone, she told me in one session. True strength is in knowing when to lean on others and when to stand on your own. I began the painful work of dismantling my defenses, of learning to sit with uncomfortable emotions instead of burying them under work and perfectionism. I reached out to friends I'd neglected, reconnected with my sister, started keeping a journal where I forced myself to write down not just what I did each day, but how I felt about it, and I wrote to Mark long emails that I crafted and revised like the marketing campaigns I was known for, then deleted without sending because they felt too calculated. Finally, after a particularly brutal therapy session, I sat down and wrote from the heart, no filters, no perfect phrasing. Mark, I don't know if you'll read this, or if it matters anymore, but I need to say it anyway. I'm sorry. Not the polite, surface-level sorry I've offered in the past, but a real gut-wrenching sorry that comes from finally understanding what I've done. I've been so afraid of needing you that I convinced myself I didn't. I've been so terrified of being hurt that I hurt you first, again and again. I pushed you away because closeness scared me, and then I blamed you for the distance. You were right about everything. I don't know how to be vulnerable. I don't know how to need someone without feeling like I'm losing myself. But I want to learn. I love you. I've always loved you, even when I couldn't show it. And if you can find it in your heart to give us another chance, I promise to do the work. Real work, every day, to be a partner worthy of you. But I also understand if it's too late, if I've broken something that can't be fixed. I'll respect your decision either way. With all my heart, which is finally learning to speak, Emma, I sent it before I could reconsider, then waited, checking my phone compulsively for 3 days. When no response came, I had to accept that this, too, might be part of my journey, learning to sit with rejection and disappointment without shutting down. On the fourth day, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Mark standing there, my letter printed out and folded in his hand. "Did you mean it?" he asked without preamble. "All of it?" "Every word," I said, fighting the urge to compose myself, to present a perfect facade. Instead, I let him see me, hair unwashed, eyes red from crying, wearing the old college sweatshirt I'd stolen from him years ago. "I can't come back yet," he said, and my heart sank. "But I think we should try. Counseling, dating each other again, rebuilding from the ground up." Hope bloomed in my chest, tentative but real. "I'd like that." He nodded, still standing on the threshold, not yet ready to cross it. "It won't be easy, Emma. We both need to change, not just you." "I know." I took a deep breath. "I'm seeing someone. A therapist, I mean. She's helping me understand some things." Surprise flickered across his face, followed by a small smile. That's good. I've been talking to someone too." We stood in silence for a moment, neither sure what came next. "Would you like to have dinner?" I finally asked. "Not here, neutral territory, just to talk." He considered, then nodded. "Friday? That Italian place near the park?" "I'll be there." I hesitated, then added, "Thank you for not giving up completely." "I almost did," he admitted. "But then I realized something. The woman who wrote that letter? That's the woman I fell in love with. She was in there all along." He turned to go, then paused. "Oh, and Emma, wear the bracelet. I like seeing it on you." As I watched him walk away, I touched the olive branch charm on my wrist and allowed myself to feel something I'd been denying for too long. Hope, mixed with fear, mixed with love. Real, messy, complicated love. We had a long road ahead of us. There would be setbacks and hard conversations, moments of doubt, and moments of connection. Nothing was guaranteed. But for the first time in years, I was ready to fight for our marriage, not with cool rationality and perfect arguments, but with an open heart and the courage to be seen, truly seen, by the man I loved. Sometimes you have to lose everything to understand what matters. Sometimes the walls you build to protect yourself become your prison. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you get a second chance to tear them down.